This week's episode is brought to you by Campaign Refinery, an amazing new email marketing automation tool. Look, in the world of digital marketing, there's a lot to keep track of. We all know this. As much as we're in love with social media and the power of social conversation here at Social Inc. and on the All About Digital Marketing podcast, we are well aware at just how powerful email marketing can be. Email marketing is not dead. In fact, it's never been more important to help you leverage your presence everywhere else into the one channel that you'll own, regardless of what changes Facebook, Twitter, or any other platform makes in the future. I've known the founder, Travis Ketchum, for years, and he's been a past guest on the podcast, episode 15 if you want to listen to it. I've personally used his other products before, and they've been fantastic. The amount of thought that he's put into each and every one of what he's created has been incredible. I'd highly encourage you to try their free 14-day trial at campaignrefinery.com to see what world-class email marketing automation can do for you and your business. Massive thank you to Travis and Campaign Refinery for their support of the All About Digital Marketing show. Welcome to the All About Digital Marketing podcast. The show all about
digital marketing.
Digital marketing.
Digital marketing.
Digital marketing.
Brought to you by Social Inc., a digital marketing agency specializing in social media and content marketing for brave brands and forward-thinking SMEs. I'm your host, Chris Bruno, and as always, we're here to bring you the most actionable tips, tricks, tools, and insights to help you achieve more when it comes to your digital marketing. Subscribe to the show and be sure to share with a friend if you found something useful or interesting. You can find all the show notes and more information on www.allaboutdigitalmarketing.co.uk. Phil, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, Chris. Yeah, I'm pleased to be here. Been looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, Phil, I'm only going to give up half of what you actually do, but as a retired person, I'm going to say you're not very retired. You're a chairman for a digital health company, an angel investor, non-exec director, and probably I've missed off half a dozen other things that you currently do. But can you tell everyone that's listening a little bit more about yourself, your history, and how you ended up in such a busy retirement?
Yeah, I suppose it's truth be known, I'm not really retired at all, but my wife hopes sometimes that I will. The main thing I do is I'm a chairman of a company that develops electronic medical records, and it's a small company, and we've got dev people and people that deploy software, and we don't have a strength in marketing. We've got a great salesperson, and I try to pick up the marketing side of the company's activities because I've got some background in marketing or at least teaching marketing when it was pre-digital. And then alongside of that, I'm a NED, as you said, and I do some mentoring and coaching with startups. But my background is primarily health. And I came out of kind of substantive employment in health about 12, 13 years ago, a bit of change of tack, and started in this whole area of mentoring, coaching, working with startups until I've with this one particular company I've been with 7 years, and I became the chairman of it last year. So that's me.
So again, for anyone who's complaining about having a side project or side hustle, I think they'll be happy to know that Phil's out there doing a lot of different things. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about today, Phil, and it comes off the back of us having met online, having had a couple of conversations ourselves, but it was all about the emotional side of marketing. And I think it's something that gets lost a lot these days in digital world, because we forget that actually these things are principles of human nature. They're principles of marketing in particular. But from your point of view, emotional marketing, how important does that act, or how important are the emotions and the emotional side of things? How important is that within marketing for you?
I'd say, from my perspective, is absolutely fundamental. And it, knowing that we were going to have a conversation kind of prompted me to go back and look at, how people define marketing in the first place. and it's variously described, but here's one, if you like. It's a set of management processes through which goods or services move from concept to the customer, requiring the coordination of the four elements, the four Ps. And I guess most people in marketing would know what the four Ps are. And then I thought about that for a while, and I thought, well, it's just so fun. Well, it's right in one level, and then on another level, it's just so fundamentally wrong, because you can't start marketing anything without understanding where the customer is and what their pain is, what their problems are, how you can give value, how you can create some attraction or some magnetism between you and the customer, how you get some cut through with them. And you can't do those things unless you start looking at emotional marketing. Otherwise, it's all purely kind of, when I say digital, it's purely mechanical, isn't it? And it on its own, that doesn't work.
So I agree with you 100%. I think one of the biggest errors that I've seen a lot of small companies and startups make is pushing a product or a service and not realizing exactly what you've mentioned there, taking into account who your target audience is, where they're at in their journey, what that looks like for them, but most importantly, what problem or pain point you're solving for them. Because ultimately, and the example I always end up using, and again, apologies if my accountant is listening, but I hate keeping accounts. It's not my forte. It's not because I'm not good with numbers. It's just because it's a lot of data entry. There's a lot of boring steps to it. It doesn't really, and at the end of it, it usually equates to me owing HMRC some money. So ultimately, there's no part of that process that I really enjoy. But there are products, so my accountant, for one of them as a service, she looks after all of this and makes sure that everything works and that we're always up to date. There are tools and products that are out there, like we use Xero, I believe. And basically this helps to take away that painful, ledger kind of Excel version of it. But again, it's always about resolving a problem, resolving a pain point that for me is very much, I don't particularly like accountancy. But it is something that a lot of small businesses, and especially startups as well at the beginning, can sometimes lose track of. And they end up focused on building the product that they want, as opposed to the product that solves a need or a problem for their audience. Have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A couple of years ago, I wrote a post that I put on LinkedIn, which I had some fun with. And I think if you're thinking about, trying to market a product or service, I've got some of this from other sources, but I think it's interesting, or fun, if you like, but also interesting to try to put your product or service into one of four categories. And you might have come across this, Chris, but they're called painkillers, vaccines, vitamins, or oxygen. I don't know if that's a kind of categorization that you've come across.
I haven't come across that, but as we are recording this during lockdown periods, during the COVID-19 crisis, this seems like a very particular version of this. So can you explain those four categories?
Well, painkillers are those, so I'll just give some examples, and they'll be, fairly obvious as to what they're about. So a painkiller is, as you're saying, where you have a customer that has a pain point and you're trying to solve that pain. And sometimes at the extreme ends, they might be called the morphine solution. And there are things like, petrol, the internet, your telephone, your cleaning and catering, your transport needs. They're those sorts of things. Whereas vitamins are the kind of polar opposites. They're the non-essential or nice to have things in life. So they might be things like, branded sportswear or home decor, or the decorative case that you put round your kind of painkiller phone, as it were, jewelry, fashion items, apps, chocolate, cinema tickets, gym subscriptions, those sorts of things. And then oxygen are the things that are kind of vital to life, if you like food, basic foodstuffs, supermarkets, heating fuel, soap, essential medicines, surgery. You can see where I'm going with that. And then vaccines are the things that you buy to prevent or limit bad things happening or to compensate you when they do, like a burglar alarm or anti-wrinkle cream or an umbrella or a particular diet and supplements or an insurance policy or a training course or a health checkup. And because this is about emotional marketing as, alongside these categories, I think if you think about your product and can put it into one of those baskets, if you like, then you need to think about what are the emotions that you're trying to trigger or tug at.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. And again, recognizing the difference in marketing. So I think the episode that's just gone live whilst we're recording this actually today was all about B2B and niche marketing with a lady called Anna Rains. And what was really interesting with her, again, it always comes back to the same thing, because understanding the niche that your product is in, understanding your target audience allows you to then market to them effectively, right? And I think what's interesting, the way you're saying this, and with this kind of metaphor almost of these different categories, each of them has a different purchasing reason, a different emotional reason that's attached to that. So I guess the real question would be, would you be happy to go through a couple of these different ones? We don't have to go through them all, but a couple of them to help identify what the emotional things are and the differences maybe between two of those categories.
Yeah. I think, I would. What I was going to say is that people think about emotions purely as a feeling. And I just wanted to kind of lay out a kind of an element analysis of emotions, just so that when we think about emotions, we're thinking about them in a more rounded way, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a person called Shearer who talks about a component model around emotions, and they're basically saying that there's a cognitive element. So it's and I'll put this into a kind of worked example, which happened to me a month or so ago. I was going off to see a potential client. I got an interview, and I might get some consultancy work from it. And it was 12 miles away, and I'd allowed myself about 40 minutes to drive there. And it didn't take very long driving before I realized there was something seriously going on with the road, and I got held up in a traffic jam, and I didn't know of any way round, to reroute myself. And very soon I realized I was going to be late. So there's the kind of cognitive appraisal of the situation. I'm thinking I'm going to be late, so I'm evaluating the event or what's going on, or an object, if you like. And then I have kind of physiological responses, the kind of bodily symptoms. What do I start doing when I realize I'm going to be late? I'm starting to get tense. I'm drumming my fingers on the steering wheel and so on. And then there's the kind of motivational element, the things that are provoking action within me, like, can I overtake that car on the outside or even on the inside? Or, do I just turn around and give up? It's the kind of fight, flight, hormonal response, if you like. And then there are the expressive bits of it, which are around my facial expressions. If anybody was watching me, I start scowling, and my tutting to myself about I should have given myself more than 40 minutes. I should have allowed an hour or whatever. And then there's the feeling itself, how I describe that feeling of annoyance or irritation or frustration or, possibly even anger with myself. And then a kind of acceptance that I'm going to be late and that I'm going to have to ring this guy up and say, sorry, this is beyond my control, but I'll be 20 minutes late. Is that okay? So there's all those kind of components of a kind of an emotional process going on, if you like. And I think that's kind of interesting to try and appreciate that in the round when you're thinking about the emotional triggers that you want to make happen, if you like. And what just in terms of some examples, Chris, what I'd put together in thinking about this, because these will be common to everybody, that in every calendar year there are 3 high emotion events or marketing opportunities in our calendar. And they are Valentine's Day, Halloween, and Christmas. And for anyone that is a company that's developing products targeting those, they will have to think about the emotions that they are trying to appeal to as they develop their product or service range. So if you just take Valentine's, for example, there's somebody producing greetings cards or gifts for Valentine's Day, and they no doubt start in August or September for the following year. And they don't just sort of say, well, we're going to produce cards or we're going to produce gifts. My assumption is, they have to think about the emotions that they're trying to appeal to make somebody buy something for somebody else, like hope, love, vanity, lust, disappointment. There's all that kind of emotional preparation that goes into thinking about what they will get ready. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting one, especially those 3 in particular. They're very, very big commercial days, and they bring with them a host of other things around them. But it's always a case of, like you mentioned, connecting, I think, those dots. And it can be hard, right? Sometimes it's very hard to see the wood from the trees. So I've met lots of technical founders, people like that especially have difficulty distancing themselves from the product that they're building because they feel like that is how it's going to go or what it's going to be or what the way it should be. And then, like you mentioned there, if you're creating cards for Valentine's Day, I can't just write funny, sarcastic comments that I would like to see on a card. Chances are my company might not do so well. Yeah. Or maybe there's a very specific market for people who are a little bit twisted and dark like I am for humor wise. But the reality is, again, you're always looking for that connection back to an emotion. And I think that's what's always impressive about marketing, in the sense of, there are principles in marketing that haven't changed since we started. There's lots of technologies and lots of channels and lots of tools and tricks and tips and all the other nonsense that goes around it that changes a lot, but the principles themselves really haven't. And again, I think I always bring this back to, really understanding and knowing your audience is so important, because obviously that allows you to create a product that almost feels like it was bespoke for them. But obviously there's lots of people that feel that it was bespoke for them. This is a great fit for me. And I think that's something that's hard to explain and get right sometimes. But when you do, it really does have a bigger impact than so many other things that you might try and do.
I think you're right. And, this whole question about personalization, you design with an individual in mind, in the belief that there are enough individuals in that niche that you've actually got something that will be a goer.
There's something interesting about that, actually, because I really like the way you've put that. But so I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day. A successful company doesn't mean millions of clients. Right. And this is something that I try and kind of explain. So again, depending on what you do, how your business model works, the price point, the lifetime value of the customer, the requirements that go into it, etc. not everyone, one, wants to scale to a company that has hundreds of employees. And I know quite a few people that, make solidly good six figures every year and do not want to breach that next step, which would mean hiring 3-4 people to train to then get them to be able to replicate the work and then get that to be able to help that business model. But the reality is, again, if you can identify, and this is where the blue ocean strategy idea, right, comes into play as well. If you can identify a niche that has 10,000 people, and if you could bring in 500 of those people to become clients of yours, and each of those clients pays, £1,000 a year, that's a £500,000 a year revenue company. That's a huge success. So, and it's something that's quite weird because, again, I think a lot of people go too vanilla, trying to please everybody. And invariably what they're trying to do ends up doing the complete opposite, which is it doesn't really please anybody at all. It doesn't really rile anyone up either, but it just kind of sits in that nice beige tone where, we're not going to paint the walls bright red because that's a bit too aggressive. We're not going to paint it too green. That's too eco-friendly, but we're just going to go with that nice kind of beige color and we'll just sort of see what happens. And invariably, unfortunately, that's one of those things that, once you can identify your audience and understand who that niche is and who those people are, and once you understand the emotional side of it, the actual journey with your customer can be a lot more direct because of the fact that you're not just being soft about it. You can stand on your principles of who you are, what you do. You understand who they are, what they do. You understand what they want and what they're looking for. And now your marketing can really have some energy behind it, on the sense of, we're banging the same door. We're all banging the same drum. We're all doing this in the same direction. This is what we all want to do. And therefore the company aligns almost automatically with the niche.
Yes. And two things came to mind, and one of them is directly relevant to the company I'm a chairman of. And if we go back to the beginning of the 20th century when Henry Ford said you can have any color so long as it's black. I mean, it's, mass market appeal, but actually it wasn't a model that stood the test of time because people wanted things bespoking for them. They wanted color variations and speed variations and door variations and all sorts of things. And in the company I'm chairman of, I've introduced the team to the whole business that comes from the Kano model. Professor Noriaki, the customer delight dimension, in that everyone else can do the basic stuff in developing an electronic medical record, but actually we've got to find the ways in which we can delight a certain proportion of customers so that they become ambassadors for us. And the delight, if you like, is the emotion at play in this whole play, really. We obviously don't get everything right every time, and we might disappoint one or two people, but we put it right. But on top of that, we've got to find the ways to delight customers.
I think that's a really interesting way of putting it as well, because, once you've got that, there is nothing more valuable than word of mouth.
Yeah.
As a agency owner that runs social media, I still consider, the referral element and people sharing content to be more powerful than any ads we could run directly, because it has that weight and that resonance and that authenticity. So I think delighting a customer and having somebody that becomes a true fan, the crazy raving lunatic fan that loves you and talks about you all the time, is a hugely valuable step to have. But I think what you mentioned there, which is, especially nowadays when it is all about technology, right? Things can be copied very easily, and very often are. You can look to certain Southeast Asian countries where cars and stuff are replicated and all sorts of things are faked, and you've got knockoffs of absolutely everything. But the reality is people buy the brand because they have an attachment to that brand or because they have an experience with that brand that they like. And there's always, well, exactly what you said, there's always an emotional attachment. But I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I'm going to kind of go down one of my famous rabbit holes, but hopefully I'll take you with me. But the idea is actually people don't realize how much nowadays your marketing is also part of your customer service, if not the same almost. So I'm not saying that you don't still get emails. I'm not saying that customers don't still communicate with you. But for so many businesses now, social media, for example, is the number one place for somebody to go and rant about the company because they've had a bad experience. And actually our marketing channels have fused with our customer services channels. And what's really interesting about this, and we were talking, I'm not going to remember who, but we were talking with one of our previous guests about this. And she was saying, I love getting negative reviews. I love getting negative reviews because you can turn a negative experience into a delightful one. And I'm using delightful instead of the word that she used, but again, it's because it's spot on. Whereas if you get someone that's just like, yeah, it was okay, it's very hard to move the needle. That person doesn't have emotions either way, neither good nor bad. But actually, what an amazing place to be able to actually accept negative feedback, bring it inboard, bring it inwards, understand what it is, and then help resolve that problem in a dynamic way that takes somebody from being, oh my God, I can't believe this doesn't work, to turning around and saying, this is the best company I ever worked with because as soon as I had a problem, they addressed it, they helped it, they worked with us. Now I'm going to stay with them because I know how they work. And that's something I think that's really important. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd entirely agree. You know, this whole kind of complaints are jewels philosophy really is you know, I've worked in businesses where, you know, people who complain are just treated as irritants that you have to find a way of silencing or shutting up. You know, but I think that's a kind of wrong-footed approach. I think you've got to prize, you know, this feedback because it's the route by which you can make things better, not only for them but for everybody else.
I think that's, I completely agree. And again, it's something that unfortunately I see way too many people not necessarily doing, not necessarily taking on that feedback and seeing it as being a positive.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you can get to the point where you can convert those people to being ambassadors for your business, then who better? You know, who better to have an advocate for you than somebody says, you know, they listen to me and within a day or two they'd come back and, you know, offer me this solution and it's fabulous.
Yeah, I had I don't mind just talking about this either, but I had a conversation about 5 weeks ago with EE. Now I've been with EE for coming up to 6 years now. And I'm stuck in France at the moment, and I message them. I'm in rural France, so quite often I have to use 4G as opposed to the local internet and the Wi-Fi at home. And I rang them up and I said, look, I'm in a bit of a pickle. I'm stuck in France during the lockdown stuff. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I really need to get more data. I'm burning through mine. And the lady on the phone went, just give me a second. I'll come back in a couple of minutes and I'll come up with a solution. And basically came off the phone not even a minute later and said, what we'd like to do, Mr. Bruno, is we'd like to give you 3 months double data, no cost.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that, you know, it's minute. And actually, you know, when we talk about the pains and, you know, whether it's the painkiller that I needed, like the morphine at that point, there is nothing I wouldn't have done. You know, they could have quite easily said, right, actually to give you 40 extra gig or 100 extra gig is going to cost you a new package and you have to sign up for another 12 months or whatever it is. And I pretty much would have signed anything at that point. But the fact that I was looked after almost immediately after I posted something on Twitter saying like absolutely blown away by EE because of this, because I thought it was phenomenal. And again, something that probably isn't going to cost them a huge amount of money, but just continues to put me in the bracket of I've been with EE for 6 years. I'm not going to change. They've looked after me, and I'm staying where I am. I'm happy with these guys, and I'm happy to carry on working with a company that, you know, is there to help me, especially in a hard time.
And here you are now telling me about it in a podcast that several other 1,000 people will listen to.
Absolutely. And again, I posted it on Twitter. I posted it pretty much everywhere. I mean, I think these sorts of things do need to be celebrated, right? Because it's too easy for there to become a data point for a customer. And people forget that data point is actually a human being. And those human beings, like we talked about the emotional side of it, but it's a hard enough time as it is. You're going into lockdown. I find myself in a different country. I don't have access to good Wi-Fi. And, there was no ifs or buts or qualifying questions or anything else. And I think that's the element there that people sometimes forget. I'm not telling everyone to give away twice as much of their product for the same price, because obviously that is a great way to make loyal fans, but also probably to run the business into the ground. But I do think that there's a time and a place to be there and to be supportive and to understand. And again, take the emotional context into consideration. And I think that can make a huge impact for people.
Well, as you say, the converse of that, if they'd said, yes, Mr. Bruno, you can have 40 extra gig and it will cost you, we'll have to double the price of your package or whatever. They know, if they've got any sense what emotional impact that would have on you, the negative press that they would get from doing that. And it's just not worth doing, is it? Because, there's that old adage that says if you're disappointed, you tell 100 people how disappointed you are with the service. But if you're really pleased, you might only tell 5. Probably an adage that existed before Twitter.
Yeah, I think that would be multiplied by the millions nowadays for the negative, but probably hasn't changed that much for the positive.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I was going to ask you one question actually before we start looking to wrap up, because I don't want to say getting towards that time, but from your point of view, because you did teach marketing, and this is the pre-digital marketing, so the real stuff, the stuff that madmen were made of. So in my head, I imagine you always had a glass of scotch in your hand whilst teaching, but I might be wrong. The ideas and the principles that you've seen carried forward, and the obvious and huge changes in the way that we market over the last 10 years, right? What have been the biggest positives that you've seen in terms of the changes in the way that we actually market companies these days?
I mean, I think if I go back to when I used to teach, I had little appreciation of the importance of emotion in a marketing process. It was as I've alluded to at the beginning, the fairly bog standard stuff. Here are some concepts like the 4 Ps, or a marketing funnel, or awareness, interest, desire, action, etc. And you should be able to do marketing, providing you've got a good grasp of these 4 concepts. And you dig into each one: product, price, promotion, place, etc. And I think what's subsequently happened is, I guess 2 things. One is a kind of bifurcation of down one track is, some people, and I probably put myself in that camp, have a much better understanding of how important empathy is. In terms of understanding where their customer is and what they need and what they want and how to respond to that. And down the other camp, there's the kind of data-driven marketing. Some people talk about marketing being a maths game. It's all about a whole lot of metrics and how you can reach people, and how you convert numbers of people, etc., and what works in a formula, and so on. And being able to kind of see marketing in the round across those 2 almost bifurcations, I think is really important. I think the second thing I was going to say is how much more creativity has come into play. How much more clever some things are. And I guess I'm particularly thinking about advertising, maybe more than marketing. And, there probably were some really clever advertising campaigns going back before my time, and people would quote things like Volkswagen and thinking small and so on. But, people might say they're a bit few and far between. But, in more recent times, if you think about your kind of favorite advertising campaigns of recent times, they're so much more clever, I guess.
I think it's probably that as well, or at least I find as well, we're exposed to a lot more now. But I can remember a couple of adverts from being a child, and for me, they really hit home. But one of them was the Hamlet Cigars adverts back in the day, where something would always go wrong or something always would happen badly. And I can remember the guy, beautiful convertible car, and as he's coming out the car park, and I think he looks over and there's a girl that's looking back, so he's sort of looking at her, doesn't pay attention, and then the barrier comes down and hits him bang on the noggin. And it was time for a Hamlet.
I was telling a friend of mine about, that Scottish kind of parody comedian, is it Rab C. Nesbitt?
Yeah.
The string vest guy with a comb over, because he featured in a Hamlet cigar advert.
Oh, fantastic.
Do you remember that one?
I don't remember it being him, no. Which one it was?
It's worth looking up, because it just does bring a smile to your face.
But there were good ads back then as well. I can remember the other one was John West, where the fisherman's fly fishing to catch salmon, and a bear comes over and grabs the salmon. So he ends up fighting this bear to wrestle the salmon. And again, I can't remember the exact tagline, but only the best salmon were like, we fight for the best salmon or something like that at John West. Yeah. But again, I think the creativity levels, what's been really interesting is how many ads and content creation things that are happening nowadays aren't actually being created just by the madmen of Fifth Avenue or whatever it was at the time. And again, it's because even a small business owner now gets to put his version or her version out there into the world. And I think that's what's really made it interesting, right? It's opened a whole new level of creativity outside of the people that know what's best. So it means that people are trying all sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you're lucky, even small things can go viral, can't they? So.
Absolutely. Well, Phil, listen, thank you so much for coming on today and for agreeing to have a chat with me. Before you go, where can people find you and where can people connect with you so that they can get in touch?
I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm Phil McSweeney on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place.
Perfect. I will add the link to your LinkedIn on the show notes as well on the website. Okay. Phil, thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Been great talking to you.
Absolutely.
The All About Digital Marketing podcast is brought to you by Social Inc., a distributed digital marketing agency specialized in delivering results through online campaigns. Whether it's content marketing, social media marketing, online advertising, or web design, we've got you covered, from strategy through to delivery. If you're struggling with your digital marketing, get in touch today by simply visiting www.socialinc.co.